everyone, and welcome to the Source Talk Show, where God is who we turn to. My name is Michelle Velasquez, former president of the New England North Adventist Youth Federation, and with me today is.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Tamika Tomlinson, and I'm the active president for the New England North. And we have a wonderful program in store for you today. For those of you who missed last week, go back and check it out. We put the link in the description so that you can be a part of that wonderful interview. Michelle, who did we have last week?
Last week we had Dr. Naidu, and she shared a lot of very important information about mental health and food. So today we're having a part two to that, and we're going to talk some more about it, being that this month is Mental Health Month. But before we go any further, Jamaica, let's invite the presence of God.
Will you all pray with me? Dear Father God, thank you so much for your love and your mercy as we come once again on the source. Pray, Lord, that you would just be with us as we go through this program and bless all our viewers, all our listeners. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Jamaica, did you have a good week?
I did. My week has been going good.
Did you put some of those practices Dr. Naidu was sharing with us into practice?
Let's just say I'm a work in progress. It takes time to get on the right track, but I've been intentional about just following those guidelines. Set out just to make sure you're, healthy and strong. So for sure.
That's important. That's important. It was a struggle for me and sugar this week. I don't know why, but I wanted sugar. But I just, as we go into our program for today, a quick question. Is there anything that stood out from last week's conversation?
So one of the things that stood out for me when Dr. Naidu was talking is that when she said 70% of your immune system is found in your gut. And so what you eat, it does affect your mood, it does affect your emotions. And I think that's very important. A lot of times when we are eating, we're not thinking, how does this affect my brain? And I think that was something that really just stood out for me. So, like I said, just be more intentional about what goes in your mouth, because it's not only affecting your stomach, it's affecting a very important organ in your body, your brain, if not the most important.
I just thought it was really interesting when she talked about how the gut and the brain were so closely related in such a way that what you put in your system is just affecting how you think. I mean, that's just amazing how God created our bodies, and how we treat our bodies in terms of what we put inside of it really goes a long way. And she shared a whole lot, and I'm in the process of reading that book. For those of you who had gotten a chance to read her book is really interesting, and there's a lot of important information. And if you don't have a copy of the book, you still have a chance to win a copy of her book. Simply subscribe to our YouTube channel or like our Facebook page, and you have another opportunity to win a copy of her book, which is called This Is Your Brain on Food by Dr. Uma Naidu. Okay, This Is Your Brain on Food.
Yeah, it is a good read. Myself reading it as well. And you guys can join the club. We can all read it together and maybe share some highlights that we get from the story, or some highlights that we get from the book.
Definitely, definitely. So we're going to jump right into it because we have a lot of information to share. Dr. Daniel Binus, he is a psychiatrist at Beautiful Minds in California. He is going to be sharing some information about nutrition and the mind as well. And he's coming from, he's, well, holistic, just as Dr. Naidu shared with us last week. So I want you guys to join in and take the time out to share this video with someone else so they too can get the information. We want to share it with as many people as we can, because this is important information that we need to share. So please join us as we welcome in Dr. Binus, who will be interviewed by Dr. Lee Bulgin and Dr. Karen Abdool.
Well, hi, Daniel, Dr. Binus. Welcome. We're happy to have you with us. How are you today?
Doing well. Good to see you, Dr. Bulgin.
Good to see you. And I'm welcoming also Dr. Abdool. How are you, Dr. Karen?
I'm fine. So nice to be here.
Yes, nice to have both of you. And so Karen and we're going to be interviewing with Dr. Binus today, interviewing him. And so Dr. Binus, we're really just interested in how you've been integrating nutrition into your practice, Beautiful Minds Medical, out there in California. My wife Hadassah and I, we were visiting out there in 2019, and one of the first things we saw when we came into the clinic was a nutrition, like a cookbook that was there. And I think you had mentioned that it was a new thing that you were doing, selling that cookbook. Can you just tell us more about how you began to use nutrition and what you do with that in your practice?
Sure. Yeah. In residency, when I was doing my psychiatric training, I started realizing how much nutrition really affects people's mental health. And so I started learning more about that. And as I went into private practice after residency, I started integrating some of those principles. And so that's been over 10 years now. And it's been really exciting to see the difference that good nutrition plays when it comes to mental health.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about an experience you might have had with one of your patients and how nutrition made a difference to their mental well-being?
Sure. Yeah. To me, it's pretty amazing because I could definitely think of many patients where nutrition is a big factor. And certainly we take a very holistic approach, and nutrition's part of that. But there's some specific instances where, it really stands out, where it's dramatic and you're like, wow, for this individual, nutrition played a huge role. And one of the things that we've recognized over the years, and the research actually supports this, is that sugar consumption, which generally speaking, when we talk about sugar, we just think of sugary foods, but really we're talking about any refined or processed foods, because even simple carbohydrates like white flour, for example, very rapidly break down into sugar. And so sugar affects the body and the brain in a very negative way, including increasing inflammation, and it actually has a direct anti-immune effect. So it really paralyzes the immune system. And studies actually show that it increases depression, anxiety, and sometimes even psychotic symptoms in individuals. And the particular patient that was coming to mind, Dr. Abdool, as you were asking your question, is a patient who actually has a psychotic disorder. And he learned these principles and the main principle we really espouse and advocate for is a whole food, plant-based sort of diet. And what he noticed, and he came back, and because I asked him, like, how are you doing? When he came back, and after he went through our intensive outpatient program and everything, he said, I'm doing good. And I asked him about his hallucinations, and he said, yeah, they're pretty well controlled. But he said, I noticed that they do come up when I indulge in sugar or caffeine. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that very clear, dramatic difference. And, you know, we don't always see it so dramatically, but we certainly see it clearly again and again with depression, anxiety, decreasing in people as they adapt good eating habits. And also their mental clarity improves as well when they start to eat well. And so to me, it's one of the most exciting topics and something that we're just now starting to really scratch the surface on in mental health.
Wow.
That's really interesting. I have a ton of questions, not the least of which is, where is the literature on this? But I was just wondering, you know, in terms of patient treatment, how does this translate practically? Are you able to reduce the use of medication or limit other kinds of interventions that we might need to have with changes in food choice?
Absolutely. Bottom line is, when we look at treating people in a holistic manner and incorporating optimal nutrition as an aspect of that, it does reduce inflammation. And inflammation is highly linked with poor mental health outcomes. And there's a whole body of literature that's developing on that. And, you know, it's not just the inflammation, it's also the change in the levels of things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, that's brain fertilizer, if you will. And so, you know, if you're eating a better diet, basically your BDNF levels go up, which is good for your brain. It enhances neuroplasticity, which is positive brain change. And it also helps to reduce that inflammation. And so basically what we see is we see dramatically improved outcomes, not only with the psychotic symptoms, but also with anxiety and depression and ADD symptoms. And that in turn, of course, allows us to then reduce the use of psychotropic medications. And I'm not anti-medication. You know, I use medication every day in my practice, but the ideal place for medication, I believe, is trying to use it as much as a bridge as possible. In other words, helping people to, you know, manage their symptoms well enough to actually adopt the healthy lifestyle habits and thinking patterns that then help them change their brain in ways that they can really minimize the amount of medication they use.
Yeah, I think that is a really great thing, that, you know, to really use all these treatments in a complementary way, instead of trying to just, you know, focus on only one thing, but using a complement. And I mean, I think earlier, Dr. Binus, you were talking about the life coaches now that you have. One of the things that we've wondered about is, you know, how do we motivate people to continue to use these tools? How do we get them to maintain the food choice changes that have helped them? You know, people make changes and then they slide back. You know, what do you use in your practice to help people with that?
Well, whenever it comes to change, especially difficult change, I think one of the mistakes people often make is they try to do everything at one time. You know, they try to go all out, and it's exciting. And, you know, you hear about these fad diets and all of that. But we've found that when people try to change too quickly and too dramatically, that the changes are usually not enduring. So we actually do encourage people, of course, to make those positive nutritional changes, but to do it slow enough so that you can stick with the changes. So I think doing it slow enough that it's not overwhelming and that you can learn how to do it properly is very important. Secondly, trying to get support in the process, and that support can be, of course, through online support. There's a lot of great resources out there, but ideally, if you can get in-person support, that's always the best. And that's what we try to do as much as possible with our patients. We have life and health coaches. We also do educational lectures on nutrition and that sort of thing. And then we help point them to some of those resources. But if you can do it, with someone educating and in a way holding you accountable in a really positive way, and then ideally, getting family members on board, which can be sometimes difficult, but that is one of the best ways to get it to stick long term. Because if you're the only one in your family eating healthy or eating a certain way and everyone else is eating another way, it's pretty hard to stick with that. So those are a few points that I found really important for a change.
Let's just share a little bit more of some choice tidbits of tips that you have for our listeners about how they could adjust their diet in a way that might help their mental health?
Absolutely. When I think about the best sort of diet for optimizing mental health, there's two main principles that I think about. The first one is whole food, and the second one is as plant-based as possible. Let me touch on the first one first. And I think the first one's probably the most important, and that is the whole food element. And one of the main problems with the standard American diet is the level of processed foods that we're eating, which leads to a lot of inflammation and a lot of both physical and mental health problems. So basically, the principle there is try to eat food as whole or unprocessed as possible. So instead of drinking orange juice, eat an orange. Instead of choosing the white bread, make sure that you get like the sprouted whole grain bread, for example. So those are just some simple examples of trying to eat more whole foods instead of the processed foods, which does wonders for mental health. The second principle, which is as plant-based as possible, is also based on reducing the amount of inflammation. You hear a lot about diets like the ketogenic diet and the paleo diet, and those are certainly better than the standard American diet, which I love that acronym, by the way, the SAD diet, right? It is truly a SAD diet. Those are better because they don't have the processed foods. But they're still not ideal. And the reason for that is because when you're eating animal products, there is an increased risk for both some physical and mental health conditions. And part of that risk is probably mitigated, some of the researchers believe, through increased arachidonic acid levels. Arachidonic acid is actually a pro-inflammatory mediator that will increase inflammation and then in turn increase physical and mental health issues. So of course, then people argue, but what about getting into ketosis? Because ketosis can be really helpful for your physical and mental health, right? And the truth is, yes, ketosis actually can be beneficial for your mental health. But the good news is there is actually ways that you can get into ketosis without eating animal products. And the way you can actually do that is through intermittent fasting. And that's actually one thing that I found to be very helpful, even for myself personally, is with intermittent fasting. Basically, what you can do is you can go over 12 hours. Ideally, you eat all your food in about 8-hour span, and then you go the other 12 to 16 hours of the day, without food. And after 10 to 12 hours, you actually start getting into ketosis. In other words, your body and your brain start utilizing the fat breakdown products, ketones, as fuel instead of glucose. And that in turn actually improves mental health. By one of the major ways it does that is it actually increases cellular energy. They found that with intermittent fasting, it actually increases the mitochondria in the nerve cells, and the mitochondria are the part of the nerve cell that actually creates energy. And so that helps with cellular energy production. It also helps with cellular DNA repair. It improves the cellular adaptation to stress, so that even when you're under stress, you can cope better. And I've noticed that, you know, when I do some fasting myself, at first, when I started doing it, I realized I got really irritable. I was like, I'm going to bite someone's head off because I haven't eaten. But over time, what was really neat and what I discovered is that my brain actually started to become calmer even when I was fasting. And what I realized is my brain is actually learning to deal with that stress of not having the glucose and burning the ketones instead. And that now my brain is actually more resilient and functions at a higher level, even when I'm fasting or I'm not fasting. And so again, I think a whole food plant-based diet is the ideal, and we can still get the benefits of ketosis if we're really following a intermittent fasting sort of schedule.
Wow.
I'm just wondering about some of the nutrients that come with a completely plant-based diet and some that are absent. And I'm wondering how you manage that with your patients, because so far, you know, we haven't found a plant-based source of vitamin B12. And if they keep burning the Amazon, we probably won't. So
yeah, well, the only Achilles heel, as you might say, with a whole food plant-based diet is the B12. But you know, to me, that's really doesn't need to be too big of a deal, because you can certainly supplement with a little bit of B12. Some people actually argue that our intestinal bacteria will produce B12 themselves, and so, you know, and I've had some people where it seems like even if they're not supplementing with B12, they do fine on a whole food plant-based diet. And so I don't think that by itself is concerning, because like I said, you know, some people seem to do fine even without the supplementation, and you can supplement. Other than that, you can get all your nutrients very easily from a whole food plant-based diet. But it is true that you do need to eat a wider variety of foods and be a little more cautious. But that's not actually a bad thing. That's, I think, a wonderful thing, because you get to experience a more wonderful variety of foods to try.
what do you think about the concept of superfoods?
Can you elaborate a little bit what you mean by superfoods?
So every so often, I think it's sort of, well, I'm trying not to be biased in my asking of this question, but every so often, you know, you'll hear something about this superfood or that superfood, like tomatoes were a superfood and then they were terrible, and then avocados became a superfood. I think they're the superfood du jour at this point.
Yes, I understand what you're saying now. Yes.
Right.
So of course, there's some foods that are going to be higher in certain nutrients than others. And the bottom line is we want to eat a variety of food, because every food has its strength. Every food, I don't know if I should say has its weaknesses, but you know, are not as strong in certain areas. And so I think eating a variety and a combination, and it's interesting, actually, studies show that people that are plant-based and eat a more vegetarian type diet actually do tend to eat a wider variety of foods. And I think a lot of that is because there's so many different types of vegetables and fruits out there that you really can enjoy, you know, and so I don't think there's any one superfood, but certainly, you know, there are some foods that are extremely high in like antioxidants. For example, you think about blueberries or pomegranates or something like that. So those can be very healthy, and they're probably going to be more bang for your buck overall for certain things. But you don't want to just try to survive off of pomegranates or blueberries for the rest of your life, even though they're good foods, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can also be, you know, vegetarian and only eat French fries, and
That's right.
that's not.
And that's why I don't like the term vegan or vegetarian, because, you know, some of the unhealthiest people I've met are actually vegan, but they're, you know, stuffing down like vegan ice cream and Oreos and French fries and this sort of thing. And it's like, that's horrible. That's why, again, I go back to that idea of whole food, plant-based, wide variety. That's really going to be the ideal.
What do you think about juicing? I'm just curious about that. You know, my kids love juice, and I always read the labels when I buy things, and realize that there's almost no supplements in juice anymore. I don't know what happened, but they've stopped like supplementing them with vitamins. So I stopped buying juice, but I would buy like a bag of oranges and then juice the oranges so that my kids would drink it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way if you're going to juice. It's more time intensive, but it's going to be healthier because you're, you know, it's fresh and all of that. You know, juicing in general, not all bad, because you do get certainly a concentration of nutrients that you're not going to be able to ingest on other levels. So I think that aspect can be helpful at times, but I also discourage people, generally speaking, from doing too many juices for two reasons. Number one, it is going to increase your calorie density, and so that, of course, can cause weight gain. And secondly, which kind of goes hand in hand, you're also concentrating the level of sugar, which will then give you more of a spike in blood sugar. Like, for example, one of the best ways, if you're going into a diabetic coma, or maybe you're not quite there, but you're low in blood sugar, is to, boom, drink some orange juice, right? Why is that? Because it almost immediately absorbs into your bloodstream, and boom, you get a blood sugar spike. Now, that's good if you're low on blood sugar and about to go into diabetic coma, but not good if your blood sugar is normal, because you're setting yourself up for insulin resistance, because it's those blood sugar spikes that actually set the stage for insulin resistance in the long term. And what the fiber does in the orange is it actually makes you break down the fruit more slowly, and then the blood sugar actually increases more slowly instead of getting that big spike, if that makes sense.
Do you have any recommendations? And I'm asking this question with some of my patients in mind. Do you have recommendations for ways that people who are struggling with obesity, and of course we know that there's crosstalk in the brain because there's also inflammation in the pathways that regulate the feedback loop for hunger. And so hyperinflammation in the brain does a lot of different things, and it promotes obesity as well. So for people who are struggling and who are trying to eat a plant-based diet, but are having difficulty trying to kind of figure out what to eat, are there recommendations for books or anything that you're inclined to say, hey, check out this particular book or read this?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, some of the that's definitely a great question, and there's so much to talk about there. But one element that I think is important is to, of course, think about the mechanics of what you're going to eat and all that, but also the cognitive aspect, or the psychological aspect, I'll say, of food and food addiction. Because oftentimes when people are struggling with weight, there is a food addiction. And, I know that's not a DSM diagnosis, but we'll say a dysfunctional relationship with food.
Yeah.
There's sure. That can be definitely part of it. And so I think it is very important for people to explore that relationship with food. Why am I overeating? Why am I choosing the wrong things? And doing some work potentially with a therapist on that. Oftentimes group therapy and or, support groups like Overeaters Anonymous or Food Addicts Anonymous actually can be very helpful. A lot of times I think eating the wrong things or overeating boils down to a sense of disconnection, loneliness, stress, frustration. And so all of those things certainly need to be addressed. But then, as far as the practical elements of how do I do it, there's a lot of great resources. I really like, there's a simple book called From Plant to Plate by Tammy Bivens, which I really enjoy. I really like the website nutritionfacts.org. Dr. Michael Greger has a lot of really great resources on there. He has a book called How Not to Die. And then he also has another book, How Not to Diet. And I like that because, when we talk about diets and all that, a lot of times, you do it for a few weeks and it's a fad and then you move on. But we're really talking about a lifestyle change that lasts. And so there needs to be, the physical change, but there also, which goes along with the habit change, there needs to be the psychological change, the relationship change. And I think even part of that is, really tapping into a spiritual connection, which can help bring about that lasting change as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Indeed.
Sure.
Indeed. And so, we have you, Dr. Vinus, and like you've gone, into eloquent detail about the nutrition aspects. But I mean, I know your clinic has its acronym Choose Life, and there are all these other elements that stand out. A lot of times in our health work, I feel like we emphasize nutrition to the exclusion sometimes of other elements. Could you touch on one or two other elements that stand out to you as key elements for us to really also include?
Absolutely. I think, and this is actually the first letter of our Choose Life acronym, is connection. To me, there's no mental health without connection. And so, of course, what are we talking about there? We're talking about both spiritual and relational connection with other human beings. And especially with what we've witnessed here in recent months, with the pandemic and everything, I think it's becoming increasingly clear as how important that is. And, a sense of isolation and loneliness can be actually more harmful for your health than obesity or even smoking cigarettes. And so that just gives you kind of some sense of the scope of the importance of a sense of connectedness. Another thing that I really emphasize and encourage people, and is probably one of the quickest ways, if not the quickest way, to jumpstart someone's mental health down the right track, is cardiovascular exercise. So trying to get your heart pumping, doing some sort of exercise. I mean, it stimulates the brain fertilizer, the BDNF in your brain. It stimulates blood flow to the brain, especially activates the frontal lobe, which we know is the most important part of the brain for cognition, thinking, making good decisions, self-control, and emotional regulation. So those are the two additional elements that if I had to pick two, and they're all important, but those would be the ones that I'd say you got to work on those things for sure.
Yeah. Wow. And going like a little walking group. Sounds like a walking group.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the beautiful thing. I mean, a lot of times you can connect a lot of these elements together. For example, if you go on a walking group, you're getting the exercise, you're getting the connection, you're getting some sunlight if it's sunny out, you're getting fresh air. Hopefully you're bringing your water bottle and staying well hydrated. So, that by itself is like, boom, I've got a whole bunch of the positive lifestyle habits to support my physical and my mental health in one stop.
Yes. Okay. Well, listen, we truly appreciate you just joining us today and giving us all of these tips and cues for how we can improve our mental health. And, we would be remiss if we didn't also talk about just the importance of our spiritual health as part of that. Could you just close by sharing that piece of things as well?
Sure. One of the interesting things, and it's neat because there's actually have been a lot of studies that have been done in recent years. There's one man in Duke, and he's a psychiatrist. Let's see, I'm trying to remember his name right now. Do you?
Koenig.
Yes, Dr. Koenig. He's done a lot of really fascinating studies on spirituality and mental health and the benefit of religious affiliation and lower depressive scores and anxiety. So it's astounding. One of the most interesting studies, though, that I think I've seen, and I'm sure there's a lot of other ones that I haven't seen, but this particular study was actually on HIV patients. And they looked at the CD4 T cell count, which is, the immune cell that is particularly attacked by the HIV virus. And they wanted to see how spirituality affected the CD4 count. And what they found is that when people believed in a God who was angry and judgmental and going to send them to hell sort of idea, that their CD4 cells were actually lower. In other words, they were worse off than those that didn't believe in God at all. On the other hand, those who believed in a loving, compassionate, merciful God had higher CD4 cell counts than the other two groups. And to me, it was just, wow, our whole body, our being, our immune system responds to the right kind of spirituality, but, to the wrong kind of spirituality, it actually can be catastrophic. And so it's not just helpful to have any old brand of spirituality. We need to actually understand the character of God, his great love for us, and that brings about wholeness and health to every part of our bodies.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Binus, Dr. Abdool. We appreciate the contributions from everyone, and we'll have to have everyone again sometime very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. This was really insightful and educational.
So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that interview brought to us by Dr. Lee Bulgin and Dr. Abdool. And we want to just thank you for being a part and that you learned a lot from it. Right, Michelle?
Right. It was really amazing what Dr. Bina said about spirituality and the importance of how spirituality plays such an important role in mental health. A lot of times we're so busy in our lives, we get caught up in everything else but that connection that we need to have with God. And that connection really is what solidifies and really brings us to hope and to a better future. And spirituality is not to be left out of that journey in having good mental health and just experiencing joy and enjoying the life that God has gave us. Just remember always that he is the source of everything that we need.
All right. So we hope that you would join us next time again for the Source Talk Show, where we talk about relevant topics pertaining to you and your family and your life.
We just want to say a special thank you to Dr. Binus, Dr. Abdool, and Dr. Lee Bulgin for this interview. Thank you for sharing all the important points, and we wish you all the best in your practice. May God bless you as you continue to serve him.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends and your family. And we love your comments, so go ahead and leave them in the chat. And it's not too late to get your copy of the book, This Is Your Brain on Food by Dr. Uma Naidu. And it's been a very interesting read, and I hope you can join us in that read.
Thank you for joining us on The Source, where God is who we
look to.
Look to.